Hello, everyone, and welcome to another fantastic interview for Sharing Progress in Cancer Care. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Professor Ellen Langer from the Harvard University. And I would love to tell you a little bit more about Ellen. She's a professor at Harvard, and her PhD comes from Yale University. It was in social and clinical psychology. Ellen is considered the mother of mindfulness and has written so many books on the topic, starting with her bestseller, Mindfulness, and her newest book that we'll be talking about today, The Mindful Body. And hear this, Thinking Our Way to Chronic Health. To chronic health. The Langer Lab conducts research on health, happiness, decision-making, education, business, and culture, all through the lens of mindfulness. Because of this research, among the other honors, Professor Langer has earned 3 distinguished scientific awards, the Stats Award for Unifying Psychology, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Liberty Science Genius Award. Ellen, thank you very much for saying yes to this. Welcome.
Pleasure. Thank you for that nice introduction.
Absolutely. So this is the book that I'm talking about, and we're going to have it linked below for everyone to get a copy of. I was just so captivated by the title and by the notion of thinking our way to chronic health. So my first question to you, Ellen, is you've written so many books. Why this book and why now? Why is this important?
Well, it's not more important now than it ever was. And I have been arguing for certain things for decades. And the world is very slow to come around. So if I keep writing, more people will read, and then hopefully it'll have an influence. More people will stay healthy. Um, and each time around, there's new research supporting the points that I've made in the past and continue to make. In fact, one of the important studies that I talk about here, or that was the starting point for lots of very exciting research, was the study I did back, God, I think we ran the study in 1979, published it in 81. And this was called the counterclockwise study.
Okay.
So this is fun, Aleksandra. I can call this a famous study, which it would be obnoxious, except that if you watch The Simpsons Go to Havana, they actually talk about the study.
Love
So
that.
after all these years, finally, it's out there. And the study was the first test of my mind-body unity idea. And mind-body unity really, we did a study back, oh God, it was a nursing home study back in the 70s, gave people some mindful choices, some simple decisions to make, and so on, and found out that they live longer. And the plaguing question was, how do you get from just making some choices, excuse me, to a longer life? And while I was thinking about this, it occurred to me that the problem is mind-body dualism. Most people implicitly, some explicitly, believe we have a mind and we have a body. And that's fine. We can divide up the organism in any number of ways. But
Yes.
if you have a distinct mind and a distinct body, the big question becomes, how do they talk to each other? How do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material called the body? And because of that disconnect, there are all sorts of things we can do to affect our own health that we don't end up doing. Everybody, especially in the medical world, is aware of what may be our strongest medication, which is the placebo.
Yes.
So the question was, how do you get from thinking this thing is going to help me without it having any active ingredients to it actually helping? All right, so now when I think about mind and body, I realize these are just words. And if we put the mind and the body back together as a single unit, then wherever you're putting the mind, you're necessarily putting the body. And that gives us enormous control over our health. Right? Then the question of how do you get from this fuzzy thing called a thought to something material goes away. You don't need anything intervening because it's one thing. So in that first study, what we did was retrofit a retreat to 20 years earlier. We had elderly men live there as if they were their younger selves.
Mm-hmm.
So they spoke about past events as if they were just unfolding. Everything was as if now was the past.
Mm-hmm.
In a week's time, less than a week actually, it was incredible. What we found was that their vision improved, their hearing improved, their strength, their memory, and they looked noticeably younger. Now, this should be interesting to everybody, but perhaps medical people in particular. And that, when's the last time you heard an 80-year-old's hearing improve without any medical intervention? All
Exactly.
right. Okay. So this was the first. Now we did many, many studies. Most of all of the new ones are reported in the Mindful Body on this mind body unity. So let me give you a couple of others, just so people understand what I'm trying to communicate here.
Yes.
The second study we did in the series, we took chambermaids. Okay, so these are women who are cleaning hotel and motel rooms, exercising all day long. First question we ask them is, how much exercise do you get?
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, they say they're not getting any exercise. That's because they think exercise is what you do after work, and after work, they're just too tired. So, again, a very simple study. We take half of them and we persuade them that their work is exercise. Making a bed is like working at this machine at the gym, dusting the windows at this other machine, and so on. So, we have two groups, one that thinks their work is exercise, one that doesn't realize their work is exercise. We take a host of measures before the study. When we finish the study, the groups aren't working harder, one or the other. They're not eating any differently. However, the group that now changed their mindset and sees their work as exercise lost weight. There was a change in waist to hip ratio, body mass index, and their blood pressure came down.
Incredible.
Now, this is interesting because this is really, I don't say this when I'm talking to most other audiences, and they don't really care about this finer detail, but this is really a study on the nocebo effect.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Where, for a placebo, you give somebody a nothing, they think it's something and it works. The nocebo effect, you give somebody something, but they think it's nothing and the effect goes away.
Mm-hmm.
So exercise did not have any effect unless there was the belief that exercise has the effect. All right. Let me tell you, there's so many studies. Let me just tell you two more quick ones that your
Fantastic.
audience may be interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So we take people who have type 2 diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
give them a host of tests. Now we sit them down at a computer, and the rest of this will make sense in a moment. Just bear with me. We tell them we want them to play video games on the computer and change the game they're playing every 15 minutes or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's just to ensure that they'll look at the clock next to the computer. Unbeknownst to them, the clock is rigged. For a third of the people, the clock is going twice as fast as real time. For a third, half as fast. And for a third, real time. And
Mm-hmm.
it turns out blood sugar level follows clock time, perceived time. Okay. We have people in a sleep lab. They wake up again. I'm clock crazy. We change the clock. So they think they got 2 hours more sleep, 2 hours fewer. The amount of sleep they got, biological and cognitive functions seem to follow perceived time. Well, the most recent study was a study on wound healing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let me, put all of this in a different kind of perspective because I don't think if we took any doctor and we asked them, does everybody heal at the same rate? No one is going to say yes. And, but yet when somebody asks, how long will it take to heal? They're given,
Time.
2 months, 6 months, whatever it is.
Yes.
And that typically, I think, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So
Yes.
here we inflict a wound, a minor wound. I'm not a sadist, and the powers that be wouldn't let me do it anyway if I did want to hurt people. But it's a wound. They're in front of a clock again. And again, the clock is rigged. It's going twice as fast as real time, half as fast, or real time.
Mm-hmm.
The wound heals based on clock time, perceived time. And so we have study after study, again, giving support to the idea that mind and body act as a single unit. Now, that doesn't mean that there's nothing going on under the skin. Obviously, there is. What it does mean is everything is happening more or less simultaneously.
Yes. Yes, I
Uh,
love those examples. And just as you said, as you completed that, it happens at the same time. So the thought contemporaneously
yeah,
induces a set of biochemical
exactly.
changes in the body. It's not one then the other. It's both at
Right.
the same time, and
Everything happening the
everything
same.
happens at the same
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, it would be foolish to think if I raise my hand that my whole body isn't changing.
Yes.
I report some fun things in the book. I hesitate to share this, but many years ago, decades ago, I was out in Kansas City.
Mhm.
And for reasons I can't explain, I went to an iridologist for fun.
I love
Okay.
this story
So,
from the book, by the way.
this woman looks in my eyes
Yeah.
and then tells me I have a gallbladder problem. And, I was like most of the people first listening to this now, it's just crazy, but it's kind of fun. It's like astrology or what have you. And then I went home and indeed I had a gallbladder problem. Now it doesn't seem at all odd to me because everything I maintain, everything that's represented anywhere is simultaneously represented everywhere. We just don't think to look.
We don't think to look. And that brings me to this one quote in your book that I would love to share with people. Um, on page 111, you quote Arthur Schopenhauer, and who says, "So the problem is not so much to see what nobody has yet seen, as to think what nobody has yet thought concerning that which everybody sees."
Yeah.
Such
Yes.
an incredible concept and a real perspective shift.
Well, let's step back a little bit.
Uh-huh.
That um, over these 50 years of doing research, I've come to the conclusion that mindlessness is rampant, that virtually all of us are mindless almost all the time. And we don't know it because when you're mindless, you're not there to know you're not there. All right. Now, everything that we're taught, all of the absolutes that we're taught,
Yes.
are deceptive. They're simply wrong,
Mm-hmm.
almost all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
That it'd be very hard. Well, let me give an example that changed my life. I was at this horse. Now remember, I've got this bug that's driving me crazy here.
Okay.
Um, I was at this horse event, and this man asked me if I'd watch his horse for him because he was going to get his horse a hot dog.
Mm-hmm.
Hot dog. As you told her, I was a straight A student. It's crazy. Horses are herbivorous, they don't eat meat. All right. He comes back with the hot dog, and the horse ate it. And that's when I realized that everything I thought I knew could be wrong.
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted, you do an experiment, experiments only give us probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
At best, it says that if we did the exact same thing, which we could never do exactly, we're likely to get these findings. Those are translated as absolutes. And in some sense, imagine how awkward it would be to say, we looked at these kinds of horses who weighed this, and most of them didn't eat meat. So it's shortened, but it's wrong. And all that we know, almost all that we know, especially people like me who are straight A students, are mindless. That it's not that horses don't eat meat. It's that most of the time, under the circumstances tested, horses don't eat meat. And, I'll tell you, Alexandra, well, I like to start when I lecture in person
Uh-huh.
with something very, very simple. And I ask people, how much is one plus one? Because this is the thing everybody is sure that they know. Well, it turns out, if we asked your audience, they're going to be a little frightened of me right now because they know it's not as simple to, but they'll oblige and say two. But one plus one, first of all, is only two if you're using a base 10 number system. If you're using a base two number system, one plus one is written as 10, but who cares about number system? If you add one cloud, one plus one is one. You add one pile of laundry plus one pile of laundry, one plus one is one. You add one wad of chewing gum. In the real world, one plus one doesn't equal two as more often as it does. But now think about this because If someone comes up to you now and says to you, Alexandra, how much is 1 plus 1? All of a sudden you have choices. You can say two because you know that's probably what they're expecting. You can say 10 to show them, something about mathematics.
Mm-hmm.
What you can also do, um, I just lost you. Wait a second. What you can also do
Mm-hmm.
is say one. So choice goes away when we mindlessly accept that we mindlessly accept certainty.
Absolutely.
So when you know you don't know, when you realize nobody knows, nobody can know,
Mm-hmm.
because everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspectives. Uncertainty is the rule, should be the rule, not the exception.
Yes.
And now the medical people can go through their daily discussions with patients, their daily, when they're making diagnoses. And if they simply incorporate this one idea about the power of uncertainty, everything changes. And
Everything changes.
not only that, but if I knew the best thing in the world for you is for me to cut off your arm to save your life, I would just cut off your arm.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I know, well, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
I can't be sure. The data are only probabilities. Now, what am I going to do is bring you into the decision making process because ultimately, you should be the one making the decision.
Decision.
And that makes it so much less stressful for me
Absolutely.
because when push comes to shove, we all know we don't know. But many of us think we're supposed to know.
Mm-hmm. You've touched upon two crucial concepts as when it comes to oncology. There's going to be a lot of oncologists listening to this. Control and choice.
Mm,
So when we deliver a diagnosis, and I'll come in a moment to that word and the chronicity and all of that, which is beautifully outlined in your book. But control is something that there's a perception of loss of control
mhm.
when someone hears this diagnosis, cancer.
Sure.
There is also all of a sudden a potential that someone can feel overwhelmed by needing to make a choice, and a choice that can impact so much. And what I'm hearing you say here is, because of this beautiful concept of the mind body unity, we are in control of so much more than we were led to believe or we think. And also there's that dropping in to that choice and a place from within to make it
Mhm.
actually takes away a lot of the stress.
Well, it's interesting. So now there are five things that came to mind while you're talking. Let me see if I talk quickly enough, maybe I'll remember more than one of them. But my own view
Yeah.
is that stress is actually the major killer.
Okay.
Now, I have an extreme hypothesis. I haven't been able to collect data. We started during COVID, but it's just too difficult. But the
Mhm.
idea is that if I wanted it, was doing this with someone in China. If we take 500 people who are just diagnosed with cancer, and we, say three different kinds of cancer,
Mhm.
and if you ask them at first how stressed they are, everybody's going to be stressed. But so let's wait 3 weeks and then check in every 3, 4 weeks. My feeling is that degree of stress will be a better predictor of the course of the disease than genetics, nutrition, or even treatment. That's a very big statement. Now we go back and we say, well, stress does not result from events. Stress is a function of the view you take of events, and that events are neither positive nor negative, they're nothing. All right. So once we recognize that we're in charge of how we're going to view this, and also, I mean, oncologists probably are aware, or well, make them aware right now, that for many people are sealed in unlived lives. And when they get some dread diagnosis, all of a sudden they realize they're not going to live forever, and people come alive. And so that even the dread diagnosis has a positive side to it.
Yeah.
Um, but the other things I was going to tell you that I
Uh-huh.
forgot were even better.
So I'm sure they'll come back into the conversation.
Okay.
They're welcome to come back, of course. Now, when it comes to medical diagnosis, there's a phrase you use in the book that says trapped by medical diagnosis. And you go on to talk about how the diagnosis is a static thing. It almost implies that you're locked into something that is bound to get worse.
Right.
Like most of the things in your book, you challenge that paradigm.
Yeah. I
Tell us
think
about
that,
that.
well, I think that, so I have a dear friend here, who just the other day found out she has a spot on her lungs and a spot on her vagina. And so I said, we have no idea what that means. We don't know if that spot has been there for the last 50 years,
Mhm.
if the spot is smaller today than it was yesterday, if it's larger, or and so on. In some ways, we have such fancy technology. Everybody possibly should get a full body scan when they're young, so we have something to measure it against.
Mhm.
Rather than you go and all of a sudden they see something, and that something is compared to other people, not to you at a different time, right? The other thing that you were alluding to, is we've done, not with cancer but with many other diseases, which is attention to symptom variability as a treatment for chronic illness. So
Mhm.
when you get a chronic illness, be it cancer, anything, chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, whatever it is, the presumption people tend to make is that the symptoms are going to stay the same or get worse.
Mhm.
Nothing moves only in one direction. It's like the stock market. When the stock market is going up, it doesn't go straight up, it goes up, then goes down a little, then. But we don't notice these changes, and control over our health comes in noticing. Okay, so we do this thing first by getting people involved in this treatment. Since they're in charge, the loss of control that they feel once the original diagnosis is made tends to be reduced considerably.
Mhm.
Now, what we're going to do is call you periodically
Yeah.
and simply ask you, how is the symptom? Is it better or worse than the last time we called?
Mhm.
And what will happen is the first thing is that you'll see, oh, it changes. All
Mhm.
right. Now, and sometimes it'll be better. That itself feels good. Now we ask you why. Why is it better or worse?
Mhm.
Several things happen when you do this. The
Mhm.
first thing is that by noticing that it changes, people become more hopeful rather than think it's just a one-way ticket to getting worse and worse.
Mhm.
Second, by asking the question why, that engages people in a mindful search. And we have decades of research where we make people more mindful. I should interrupt myself and tell people what I mean by mindfulness, but I'll get to that in maybe a minute if you help me remember.
I will.
But okay, that I've lost myself in all my parentheses here. Okay, so why is it getting worse? You do a mindful search. Our research has shown that mindfulness itself is good for your health.
Mhm.
All right. So what happens now is that you started off, you were feeling helpless, you're presuming your symptoms are only going to get worse. Now you see there are things you can do for yourself, and sometimes your symptoms are better. When you ask why is it better now, that you become engaged in a process that itself is good for your health. And I believe that if you're looking for a solution, you're more likely to find one than if you're not. Now, with chronic illnesses, the medical world calls them chronic because the medical world does not know how to treat them. All right, fine. That doesn't mean there aren't things that can be done.
Yeah.
All right. But if you don't believe, again, that something can be cured, you don't do anything about it. Well, we did this with people who have multiple sclerosis, stroke, Parkinson's, chronic pain,
Mhm.
um, a host of real disorders. And in each case, the symptoms were significantly ameliorated.
Okay.
So, and there's no side effects,
Mhm.
and it doesn't mean you can't follow your doctor's orders.
Yeah.
But when somebody is waiting to see, I took the test a week ago and I'm still waiting. That's very, very stressful.
Yes,
People can be taught this. So
absolutely. It is.
let me put something else,
Mm-hmm.
say something that I was going to tell you before.
Mm-hmm.
So um, this book, The Mindful Body, started off as a memoir. So there are lots of personal stories in there, and two of them I think are relevant now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was married when I was obscenely young. Don't tell anybody. All right. So I'm 19 on my honeymoon in Paris. I was 19 going on 40.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a restaurant. I ordered the mixed grill. On the mixed grill is pancreas. I say to my then husband, which of these is the pancreas? He points to something on the plate. I eat everything else with gusto. Now comes the moment of truth. Can I get myself to eat the pancreas? I start eating it and I literally get sick. He starts laughing. I said, "What are you laughing at?" He said, "That's chicken. You ate the pancreas a long time ago." So I had made myself sick. Not that long after this, my mother developed breast cancer. The cancer had metastasized to her pancreas. That's the end game, right? And then magically, it was gone. So here I had an example. I made myself sick. Somehow she made herself well. And those were although I didn't know it was going to result in the mindful body or the mind body unity, those were the earliest examples.
You saw it both ways, a real touchstones of
Huh.
showing you how that can go both ways, and
Huh.
you talk about it in the book. Um,
But let me interrupt you for one more second because I really think people need to understand what does she mean when she talks about
Mine,
mindfulness.
exactly.
So when you say mindfulness, many people think of meditation, and meditation is fine. It's different from what I'm talking about. Also, meditation is not mindfulness. Meditation is a practice you undergo, hopefully to result in post meditative mindfulness. Mindfulness, as we study it, is immediate. It's not a practice, it's a way of life that follows from an appreciation of uncertainty. So there are two ways to become mindful: top down, and that's the one I already gave people.
Hmm.
If you recognize everything is always changing, everything looks different from different perspectives, so you can't know, then you approach everything mindfully.
Hmm.
It's the mistaken assumption that you know
Hmm.
where the mind shuts down, and so too the body.
Hmm.
The other is bottom up. You can, walk outside, notice three new things. When you're at work, notice three new things about your patients, your spouses, the building. And as you notice three new things about the things you thought you knew, over time you come to appreciate, yeah, I don't really know anything for sure because everything is changing. So,
Exactly.
like, if I were to invite you to my house right now, you've never been to my house. You don't have to practice anything. You walk in the house, you're going to notice. You say, "What books is she reading? Did she do that painting? What's that strange thing over there?"
Hmm.
You know, um, and in a sense, everything becomes new again.
It's a beautiful practice, both the top down and the bottom up. And I think it's really applicable to everyone who's listening, not just in the oncology clinics, which I really do encourage people to come up with their own ways of practicing this daily, but just in daily life. And it's almost as if mindfulness in this context is the practice of noticing change.
Oh, exactly. So what we should do as people, but certainly physicians, you're going to go see Mrs. Smith. You
Mhm.
have a chart that tells you something about Mrs. Smith. That's not Mrs. Smith anymore. That chart is who she was, possibly by whoever wrote the things on the chart the day
Mhm.
before.
Mhm.
And it's interesting because Atul Gawande, he was a wonderful guy. Right before he came out with checklists,
Mhm.
I had seen him, but it was too late because the book was in press, and it's a wonderful book. If you use checklists, all the errors, the number of errors in surgery and every other aspect of medicine are significantly reduced. But checklists are not nearly as good as a mindful checklist would be. You don't go in and you say, "Is Mrs. Smith breathing?" You would say, you would have to describe Mrs. Smith's breathing.
Mhm.
So rather than yes, no, things that require that you actually look at the patient. And so if the oncologist is now looking for how the patient is different from even the day before or a few hours earlier, what happens is wonderful because it's good for the oncologist. We're people too. The more mindful we are, the healthier we are. But more than that, Mrs. Smith now feels cared for
Yes.
because you're actually noticing who she is. And then she's nicer to you. And you feel more cared for. And, not to make it too sound too facile, but essentially everything just gets better.
Everything gets better. Exactly. Now, it feels like there's a component of observation and curiosity, and they
Yeah.
play
Well,
crucial
yeah.
parts.
Well, observation, definitely.
Hmm.
Curiosity, um, maybe less so, although it
Okay.
sounds very similar.
Uh-huh.
Because, so let's say to you, let's say you're reading a newspaper and there's a little hot chocolate that's spilled on it.
Hmm.
And then you're curious, is that an R or an N?
Hmm.
The implication is that it is one or the other.
Okay.
Okay, so when you're curious, it's always, with the intention of finding out what it really is. And mindfulness is a sort of an ever present wondering because it isn't any particular thing.
I love that. Mindfulness is an ever-present wondering. Beautiful. Beautiful. Could you tell us the difference between mind-body unity and mind-body equality?
Well, equality says that they're two things.
Mhm.
And, so look, when I started this, as I said, in the late 70s, early 80s, so many decades ago, the medical world did not talk about mind body connection. Then the next phase, and I think that I might have had some influence, but one never knows. People now talk about mind body, and if they're connected, you still have the same original problem. How are they connected?
Mhm.
All right. If you say equality, again, how are they connected? Now, metaphorically and linguistic, we can talk about these things any way we want.
Mhm.
But my idea was that if we put the two back together, then we become almost implicitly more aware of the enormous control we have over our health and our well-being.
Spontaneous remissions,
Yeah, yeah.
underreported.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So when my mother had that spontaneous remission, um, uh, the medical world was shocked. They wanted to write it up as medical history. I said there was nothing medical about it, Um, and there's no way to know how frequent an occurrence spontaneous remissions are. It's sort of I'm in the hospital and they write me off, and I go home to die, and then whatever I have disappears. My first thought is not to call the doctor and say, "Ha ha, you were wrong." I mean, and there are so many people who never go to the doctor in the first place. You know, um, I think they're probably more frequent.
Mhm.
It's something very hard to study, which is why we don't know a whole lot about it. But I think that people should be made aware because it's always possible. Now, if I were an oncologist and I had a patient that was riddled with stage 4 cancer, um, I would not lead them to believe that they were likely to go into a spontaneous remission. But by the same token, there is no way for me to know that it won't happen. And so by holding out some of that hope, I think does wonders for people. Then some people say, well, if a person is going to die, if they know they're going to die, then they take care of their will and their, family and whatever in somewhat different ways. I think there's some way of creating both impressions.
Yes.
You yourself, you're young, you're vital. you should take care and live for the moment because tomorrow you could get hit by a car. None of us know
None of us
how
know.
long we have to live.
Mhm.
And so I'm not suggesting we take healthy people and make them worry, but rather we give
Mhm.
some hope to people who now have disorders. Always remembering that all that you've been trained, all of us have been trained on, are experiments that only give us probabilities,
Mhm.
maybes, not absolutes.
Not
And
absolute.
so we can't know. And that should be a great relief for any physician, rather than carrying, such terrible burdens for people to be able to, and sometimes people want you to make believe and then the choice is yours. But I think it's almost always better
Mhm.
to fess up. We don't know. Here's as much as I know. If I were you, this is what I think I would do. And we can't even know what we would do if we're not actually in the situation ourselves. Um, and then again, by bringing people, because we don't know, we bring our patients into the process in a more active way. And that's probably going to be good for their health.
Yes. We've gone really far down a rabbit hole of personalized medicine. Certainly in oncology, it has brought a lot of good, a lot of good, a lot of novel treatments, a lot of novel ways of understanding the biological processes, the biology behind all of it, saved many lives. And it feels like it's time to bring the whole person back into personalized. And I feel like that's what you do with your research and with your work. So, Ellen, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you feel is
Oh,
on
of
your heart that
course,
you
there
would
are
love
things
to
you haven't
share?
asked me.
There's a lot, I know. Something that you would
Yeah.
love to leave the audience with. And I'm going to leave
Well,
them with buy
yeah.
the book, obviously.
Yeah, clearly. No, well, I think, when people really start to understand the whole concept of mindfulness, there are several questions that come to mind that maybe I can speak to. I think we should be mindful all the time. People confuse being mindful with thinking, and thinking has gotten a bad rap. You go, oh, I can't be thinking all the time.
Mhm,
Um, and it's not the thinking that's hard, it's the worrying that you're not going to successfully solve whatever the problem is.
mhm,
Um, but when you're at play, you're being mindful, you know, um, we have lots of evidence that mindfulness is energy begetting, not consuming. It's what you're doing when you're happiest. And it's sort of, I was talking on some podcast the other day, and I realized that now with people to understand, to be happy, you can't be happy and mindless. If you just sort of think, are robots happy?
mhm,
And when we're being mindless, we're responding like robots. So the essence of our happiness is to notice when we recognize that events themselves are neither good nor bad. We don't have to worry about as many things.
mhm.
And then I guess this is a little far afield given what we've talked about, but it's so important to me. Let me share it with you,
Please.
which is I've done many studies, and since the 70s, and we have people living long, big things that are very exciting. But the one thing I came to, which to me was, it still is the most important, is the very simple idea that behavior makes sense from the actor's perspective, or else the actor wouldn't do it. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, today I'm going to be obnoxious, nasty, and aggressive. Well, so when people are behaving in this way, why is that? And it turns out that each and every negative description has an equally strong but oppositely valenced alternative. So, for example, I can't stand that I'm so gullible. I'm also impulsive.
Mhm,
And so I would go to you and say, could you help me stop being gullible and impulsive? And you're going to show me the way I've behaved. Oh, yeah, God, could you imagine that I actually did those things? And I have done them. um, but when you recognize going forward, being mindful, No one is ever impulsive, they're spontaneous.
Mm,
Nobody is ever gullible, they're trusting. And
mm,
now when I realize my being gullible is because I'm trusting, I
mm,
don't want to change. And my relationships improve because I don't want you to change. Because I have, so you're inconsistent, it drives me crazy. Now I see that's because you're flexible. And
mm.
I like that. And so when our relationships are better, our health turns out to be better as well. So it's all tied to one in one way. So the more mindless you are, the more you evaluate things from a single perspective and are oblivious to alternative ways it can be understood.
There's a
By
rigidity to mindlessness.
yes,
Yeah,
and they were oblivious to it.
yeah. And yet, on the opposite, mindful really introduces, as you said earlier, it introduces choice, and it really reinforces that we do have control. And
Yeah,
again,
and when you're
control gets a bad
actively,
rap as well. Don't be such a control
yeah,
freak. Well, this is a different type of control we're talking about
exactly.
here. This is an awareness that it's all
Yeah.
connected.
The other kind of control, the negative kind that you're alluding to, falls away once you're more mindful. Because once I don't have to control anything around me because no matter what happens, I'm going to be happy. And that makes life easier for sure.
There are so many amazing examples, so many studies that you've done with your team that you outline here in the book. This book is really something that I feel every healthcare worker and every person should have in their back pocket. And I really do encourage everyone to go get The Mindful Body by Professor Langer and take your time reading it. You're going to change the way of being in such a beautiful way. I've read it a couple of weeks ago, and the examples from your book are lingering on in my mind every single day, and I keep going back to it, and I keep, just being inquisitive and catching myself when I go mindless.
Hmm.
And you can't be mindful and mindless at the same time. So there's that shift that happens on a continuous basis. And it's absolutely beautiful. And it's very rewarding, both in a professional and a personal sense. So thank you for the work that you do. I'm looking forward to the study that we will hopefully do together. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you. This was wonderful.